Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 12th Annual Treasures in the Archives. Thank you so much for spending time with us this afternoon. My name is Sierra Green, and I work as an archivist here at the Heinz History Center's Detry Library and Archives. We're really looking forward to sharing some great collection stories with you this afternoon. A couple of housekeeping remarks to begin, some of which will be relevant to all of you, others of which will be relevant to either the in-person or virtual audiences. We have ASL interpretation for the event, which is provided by the Center for Hearing and Deaf Services, and live captioning provided by AI Media. We also have assistive listening devices available. Anyone is welcome to pick one of those up towards the back of the room. For our virtual attendees, you can access the captions by clicking on the closed caption box at the bottom of your screen. To maximize your view of our speakers and our interpreter, you can adjust the size of the live video feeds by clicking on and then moving the vertical bar that separates the PowerPoint from those live video feeds. You can submit questions throughout the afternoon for our speakers by pressing the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And if you need any technical help this afternoon, you can use the chat box. We'll also be using the chat to share out resources and links that connect with our topics for today. For in-person attendees, we'll have a question and answer session towards the end of our time together, where you'll have a chance to ask questions of our presenters. Restrooms, as well as a water fountain, are to your right and then down this hallway as you exit our reading room. There are also emergency exits to your right into the stairwell, as well as to our left through this office area. Following the Q&A session, we welcome all of you to partake in kosher refreshments in our foyer area. So after a brief introduction from my colleague, Matt Strauss, we will have 4 storytelling sessions from the archives, followed by, again, that question and answer session. Thank you all again so much for joining us, and I want to welcome Matt Strauss to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So today you're here for Treasures in the Archives. This is our annual signature event that we have here in the Library and Archives. And today we have 4 talks for you today. Is there a direction I need to point this clicker in advance at the screen? All right, thanks for being with us today. So Treasures in the Archives, we have 4 talks today. This is our event where we share stories about local individuals, families, and organizations. You'll hear 4 very different topics today, but what unites them is that we are shining a light on the archival items and primary sources that we have here in the Library and Archives. These are the raw materials of history, and we think it gets you as close to a moment in time as possible. So the materials we have here in the Library and Archives, you see a sampling of the different types on screen here. We collect papers. These could be diaries, letters, company records. We have photos of many different types of formats, films, videos, oral histories. We're also a library, so we have published materials, books, newspapers, and maps. Our other goal with this program is to shed a little light on the work we do behind the scenes here in the Library and Archives. The work we do collecting these items from local individuals and organizations, preserving them so they will last into the future, organizing and describing them so that researchers can understand them and use them. So the Debt-Free Library and Archives is open to everyone. Every week we see a really diverse assortment of folks in here using our collections. Those could be students or academics, authors, genealogists, or simply those who just have an interest in local history. We're open Wednesdays through Saturdays, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., and we're always free to do research here. And with that, we're going to get right into the program here with our first speaker, Margaret Hewitt, who is our Manager of Reference Services. She oversees the History Center's library collections and facilitates archival access for our researchers of all backgrounds. She completed a master's in public history at Duquesne University in 2011 and earned an additional certified archivist accreditation with the Academy of Certified Archivists in 2019. Margaret served on the steering committee for the Society of American Archivists Solo Archivist section from 2020 to 2022, and as a board member for the Butler County Historical Society from 2021 to 2025. Please welcome Margaret to the stage.
Matt, thank you for the introduction, and I'm so pleased to be here to kick things off with our annual Treasures event. So in 1920, the employees of Pittsburgh's Kaufmann's department store launched their own magazine, the Storagram. This title is likely playing on Kaufmann's nickname, the Big Store. Here's two early covers from 1921 and 1924. And in this beautiful photo-heavy monthly publication, Kaufmannites, as they called themselves, could find updates on the company, learn about new policies or product lines, share their vacation photographs, engagements, marriage announcements, birth announcements, celebrate promotions or retirements, and even more in the passing of former colleagues. So you might be surprised to learn that this is in no way a novel idea. The Kaufmannites were jumping on a growing trend in corporate publishing at the time. The Storagram emerged in a 20th century golden age of employee magazines, joining hundreds of other internal magazines that were already in production around the United States. A 1922 article I found in the University Journal of Business documented the rise of internal employee magazines, which were also called house organs. The author argued that publications were a two-pronged tool during World War I in factories. So they existed to promote managerial interest in safety, following policy, in thrift, but it also promoted good spirit and a feeling of fellowship amongst employees amid all the stress of supporting war production. The social community and buy-in into company mission that was promoted by these internal magazines kept many of them in print after the war. And the popularity spurred countless new publications in companies across the country, like here at Kaufmann's. When Storagram debuted in 1920, their staff might even have referred to a new guidebook that was published the same year called Effective House Organs. This 100-page manual even had a chapter aimed specifically at this type of publication within department stores. So this is not to say that internal publications did not exist before World War I. So, for example, the H.J. Heinz Company Management launched a specialized newsletter in 1897 that they called Pickles. This was aimed exclusively at their traveling salesmen. In the first issue of Pickles, which is shown here, the intent was clear, to quote, lay before you, from time to time, information that may be of use to you in successfully prosecuting your line of business. It is not our object to make this a publication of puffs, yet any meritorious achievement on the part of our readers will be cheerfully given mention. Now, with time, Pickles evolved into a successor newsletter, the 57. These sales victories were still deemed worthy of publication, but they had to share the page with puffs, engagements, and baseball team victories. So as we will explore now, because this magazine and this magazine trend that it exists in is by and for employees, rather than a downward line of communication from the management to worker, it walks this unique kind of meandering line between community bulletin board, gossip column, and workplace instructional guide. The Storagram was produced on site in the Kaufmann's printing department. The printing staff posts here in a photo from the Kaufmann's archive.
Content was compiled by a dedicated team of staff editors, reporters, and artists, and supported by a slew of department editors representing rugs, furs, stationery, and neckwear, just to name a few. Employees were encouraged to submit their news via their dedicated department editor or directly to the Storagram team. Now we know all about this production process because of a 1928 profile shown here called The People Who Make the Storagram. This lets me introduce you to, in the photo, Albert Estel, Carl Carpabel, Isidore Meyer, Anna Dahl, Anna Lanz, and Alma Lott. They were the 1928 printing staff for Kaufmann's. So let's take a look inside. Kaufmannites clearly love to share their leisure highlights outside of work. At left, Edward Cook from the wash goods department submitted this photo of himself and a friend posed while hunting in 1928. And on the right, E.T. Smith looks rather pensive on a lookout during a vacation out west in 1920. The Storagram was the place to find life updates and maybe tease our colleagues, hopefully gently. At the top left, this clipping says 13th floor. It was a thrill to us all when Miss Gibson, manager of the cafeteria, and Mr. Robert Boyd were married on May 4th. Their honeymoon took them to Boston, we hear. That's from June 1935. On top right, 11th floor. We will all be glad when Mrs. Fluke has her new house complete. We have heard so much building talk from her for months past that sometimes we think we're at a contractors convention. That's June 1927. And at the bottom, Mary Smith of the bakery department received a cedar chest from her mother for Christmas. And we noticed she is staying in evenings to work on linens to help fill her chest. Who is he? And that's January of 1928. And we also get work-sponsored recreation days. So at left, this clipping, softball team plans for 1954, is announcing that the championship-winning softball team is recruiting for the new season to participate in the commercial industrial leagues. On the right is a photo clipping from 1976, a photo featuring some wonderfully short 1970s basketball shorts, which says, quote, the Steubenville Kaufmann Cougars basketball team have already beaten Carlisle and have matches set with Sears and other local teams. The challenge goes out to any Kaufmann store to beat the Cougars. So what a lovely picture of company culture. So perhaps you're more musically inclined. For that, we have the Kaufmann Chorale and the Swing Singers. They were featured here ahead of a performance in spring 1939. So this is all fun, but the magazine does have its serious moments to give accolades to the employees. On the left, we have a list of delivery drivers who were recognized in June of 1927 for being accident-free on their road so far that calendar year, which I drive in Pittsburgh. I can appreciate that. On the right, Charles Solomon is pictured in 1954, where he is receiving his 50-year employment pin and also receiving a $1,000 check honoring his outstanding service. Here, 4 sales employees are being recognized in 1970 as part of the Dial for Dollars program. This was a program in place where an employee could get a cash reward for reporting instances like shoplifting or credit card fraud where the person was apprehended. So imagine, you get a little cash bonus just for doing a job. So like many of the corporate collections here in the library and archives, the Kaufmann's department store records do not have individual employee records. For me at the reference desk, this is a frequent cause for disappointment when folks come to ask me questions. We field so many requests related to employment as researchers look to add detail in biographical records or to corroborate family lore while they craft a family tree. But as we've just seen today, when you're looking for a specific Kaufmann's employee, you'll actually have the best chance of finding direct documentation of them, not within those archival records, but by viewing this internal employee magazine. Researchers who are not interested in a specific person, but are looking to delve deeper into the broader history of the Kaufmann store are also going to find the Storagram to be an incredible resource. The magazine was a tool annually to reflect on the proud Kaufmann's company legacy. Pittsburghers today fondly remember the store's annual Christmas display windows, but they also had anniversary windows every June to mark the anniversary of the opening of the big store, and they were equally elaborate. The Storagram issued a corresponding celebratory anniversary number. You can see two here, they're always rose themed. And it would include historic store photographs, a review of the store's history, memories from long-term employees, and a highlight feature on that year's windows. So one can imagine that these anniversary issues instill a sense of community pride in Kaufmannites. They're part of this long legacy in Pittsburgh. But conversely, it's easy to see how for Kaufmann store management, these issues are a really clever communication tool. They make sure employees know key facts about the store's history and that they know what's going on with current anniversary marketing. So in 1927, the Smithfield Street anniversary windows were all replicas of popular paintings showing famous moments in American history. This one is a tableau of Washington crossing the Delaware. This image and images of the other windows come from the Kaufmann's photographic collection in the archive. The Storagram can tell us more. So a clipping in the anniversary issue describes the whole process where they created enlarged copies of 10 famous American paintings. Those copies were then sent to Europe, where an artist painstakingly rendered them into these tableaus featuring 3-foot-tall figurines. The Storagram magazine naturally provides updates on major store changes. So if you're interested in the history of the company, this is where you want to look. For example, we have the construction of the store annex in the early 1950s. On the left is this rather dramatic photo, which is in our archival collection. We see a group of men doffing their hard hats to salute the flag while standing high in the air on the beams of a building under construction. And on the right, the photo inset in the Storagram gives us some context of what's going on in this photo. So this was from April of 1954. And workmen were raising a flag atop the downtown annex to show that the framing was complete, quote, marking the beginning of another era of renaissance for the largest store in the tri-state area. So if you're interested in the broader cultural scene here at Pittsburgh, you'll find information about exhibits that pass through Kaufmann's in the Storagram. In 1951, the store was the first U.S. stop for a decorative arts exhibit traveling the U.S. from the Exposition Française Moderne. This article describes the fabrics, lamps, soup tureens, and jewelry on view from France. And a high-profile press reception was to be attended by French dignitaries and members of Pittsburgh society. If you're interested in the scope of Kaufmann's international buying, the Storagram often includes dispatches from their employees who were based in offices overseas. That 1927 anniversary issue included a multi-page photo essay on foreign buying, and it included these 3 office photos, which were from St. Gall, Switzerland, Berlin, Germany, and Paris, France. During World War II, issues of the Storagram are naturally full of information about the home front. In February of 1942, the Storagram published a long memo to Kaufmann's employees that provided department by department instructions for air raid drills so that employees could carry out their instructions in, quote, a calm and cool manner, knowing that the lives of their colleagues and their customers might depend on it. The header of that memo is what is inset at the top right of the screen. And reading through these wartime issues, the employees reflect on their experience giving blood for the first time, knitting for soldiers, and purchasing bonds at the Kaufmann Store Credit Union. In this March 1942 photo, we see Mary Good from the neckwear department. She's wearing an armband that indicates she's part of the air raid escalator squad to help with evacuation. And she's pictured with a special air raid emergency lamp that was installed in the store. So I hope you'll glean from these examples that this magazine is a gold mine. There are stories that contextualize company culture, what it was like to work at Kaufmann's. So these two images accompanied a 1939 feature on the cafeteria, of all things. Not only do we see photos of the cafeteria line, something that probably only employees, not shoppers, are going to experience, but we learn the names of servers. We find out 75% of Kaufmann's employees use the cafeteria. And in 1 year, they will consume 6,200 gallons of ice cream manufactured on site in their own 13th floor cream plant. And lastly, I cannot close the exploration of these gems in the Storagram without highlighting camp time at Bear Run. So employees could head east to Fayette County to this Kaufmann's own camp for a week for a small fee every summer. It was clearly a beloved tradition. It features heavily in all of the summer issues of the Storagram. This image is just a portion of a collage that was put together with illustrations and photos of Kaufmannites bonding together on vacation. So in my preparation for this presentation, I counted more than 20 different in-house magazines here in our archive. Some we have just a single issue as an example. So the D.L. Clark Candy Company's Sweet Talk, the Stouffer restaurant had Stouffer News. Others, we have small runs of years. So we have a 5-year set of Jones and Laughlin's Men and Steel. But we have large collections. We have the Heinz 57, the Kaufmann Storagram, the U.S. Steel News, the Alcoa News, the Westinghouse News, the Drovot Slant. And these are just examples of the early title art for Westinghouse and Heinz. And in my opinion, the Storagram just shines for personalized local history research because it strikes this perfect balance. It's a company large enough to support this vibrant employee magazine, but it's small enough that all the content is still local. The US Steel, Westinghouse, and Heinz content gets diluted because of their national and even sometimes international scale of operations. So you're less likely to find the individual story that you're looking for. So our Storagram collection spans 1920 through 2002. And these large magazine runs, they're a blessing and a curse for researchers because there's so much untapped research potential, but that might require days or even weeks of careful reading. And that's time that not every researcher has available to them. Recognizing this hurdle, our team has initiated a project to digitize and upload portions of our employee magazine collection to the Internet Archive. And seeing the thumbnails of the early Storagram issues here, you can really appreciate the beautiful early cover art made for the Storagram. Now that these are online, the issues are fully searchable. So whether it's a product like a rug, a keyword like pension, or a department like a cafeteria, or your grandmother's name. As this digitization and access program continues, we will upload more issues of the Storagram along with issues of other employee magazines from our collections. So interested researchers can now explore these online for free. You'll find the link to the Storagram in our card catalog. For our virtual attendees, there's a link that will go out in the chat. And for those of you here joining me in person, I have a little slip of paper over on the table with some examples from the Storagram. Thank you very much for listening.
Margaret, thank you so much for that whimsical and substantive exploration of the Storagram. Next up, we have my colleague, Matt Strauss. Matt Strauss is the director of the Detry Library and Archives here at the History Center, where he oversees the acquisition, description, digitization, and preservation of the organization's library and archival collection. Matt joined the History Center in 2008 to manage the organization's first film digitization project. Since then, Matt has directed federally funded archival processing and digitization initiatives, including projects centered on the History Center's industrial archives and its Kennywood archives. Welcome, Matt.
So today we'll be exploring the Pittsburgh Bureau of Fire photographs that we have here in the library and archives. This is a remarkable collection of images detailing fires and firemen, fire stations throughout the city, different types of firefighting vehicles, between the early 1900s and 1930s. And there's about 120 images in all. And as you can see from this image here, they're really amazing and striking photographs on their own, but they also are examples of rare evidence of a changing profession during those years. But let's zoom back a little bit. I want to talk briefly about the years leading up to the early 1900s here in Pittsburgh. For most of that time, Pittsburgh was serviced by an assortment of volunteer firefighting companies. And often these were organized by city elites, business leaders, and politicians. Now, they weren't the ones actually fighting the fires usually. They had younger guys to do that. But as these companies proliferated, there was some competition between them. They would try to beat one another to the fire to get the glory of putting out that fire. There were rivalries, sometimes physical altercations between members. And on screen here, we have an image of the famous 1845 fire in Pittsburgh. And so responding to that call would have been all volunteer departments. It wasn't until 1870 that the city established a fire department. So these images pick up about 30 years after that point. And some of the earliest images in this collection are of this fire on screen here. It was in May of 1904, the Gerber Carriage Company fire. This was in downtown Pittsburgh. A gas motor that was being used exploded, so that led to this fire. And the evening edition of the Pittsburgh Press that very same day had on its front page headlines about this event, which read, "Plant burned to ground, big factory is reduced to a mass of ruins." This was a 3-alarm fire, so there was multiple companies responding to it. Fortunately, there was no fatalities, but when the building came down, there were some injured firemen. And lending to the kind of chaotic scene here was that this fire attracted a bunch of spectators. It coincided with lunch break in downtown Pittsburgh. So the newspaper reports that there was a large crowd, and when the building came down, a stampede occurred, and some folks were injured in that as well. And that's something that's kind of common as I was researching fires of that era, that crowd control was also an issue. And this is probably my favorite image in the collection. It is a fire that happened also in downtown Pittsburgh. This is in the dead of winter of 1917. And you can see it's so cold that the water being sprayed onto the smoldering wreckage here is freezing. This was the Smithfield and Diamond Street fire. Diamond Street is what we know as Forbes Avenue today. And this led to half a city block being destroyed. The Frank and Cedar department store was destroyed. Kaufmann's had a property here that was also damaged. 2 theaters were destroyed. Again, there were no fatalities, fortunately, but a number of the firemen were injured. So this collection is not all fires. This image is a very different feeling to it. It's more festive and celebratory. We see some firemen outside their station with their horses. The building is decorated. There's a big welcome banner on the front there. And this was coinciding with the Pennsylvania Firemen's Association Convention of 1907. The Firemen's Association was a statewide organization founded in 1880 and still exists today. It was a mix of fraternal, beneficial, and advocacy organizations. So it did things like provide financial support to elderly and retired firefighters, It lobbied in Harrisburg to create better legislation regarding firefighting. And so every year, and it still does this, it would go to a different city in the state. And in 1907, it was Pittsburgh's turn. And reading the newspapers from this era, I don't think it's quite at the level that we'll see next week with the draft, but it was quite an event. It was on the front pages of newspapers for multiple days. Here you see a headline, "Firemen are given a hearty welcome by Mayor Guthrie." 15,000 firemen came to town along with their families. They were met at the train station with a marching band that led them back to the hotel. So it was quite an event. And like, if you've ever been to a professional conference or something like that, this kind of sounds familiar. There was a mix of official business during the day, and then some festivities at night. So there was a big ball at Duquesne Gardens in Oakland. And the wives were provided a tour of Shenley Park and Highland Park and the Heinz factory. But there was also this professional development education component here with local firefighters welcoming visiting firefighters and showing off their latest technology and equipment. Equipment vendors were also represented, showing off their newest products and trying to drum up business. Along with this focus on the current day and the future, this convention also shined a light on the past of firefighting. And so there was this parade where veterans of the volunteer firefighting era were honored, along with the equipment they used during those days. So on screen here is a hand-powered engine called the Vigilant. It was operated by the Vigilant Fire Company. And so I think these images and reading about this event really speak to the growing sense of a professional identity and how that's solidifying over the years. And then, so connected to that is the career of this gentleman, Deputy Fire Chief Frank Locksterman. This collection contains a number of portraits of Bureau of Fire leadership in the 1920s, including this one. Chief Locksterman was active between the 1890s and 1920s, and he was instrumental in starting a school for firemen here in Pittsburgh that he modeled after a similar one in New York City. He also anticipated the transition from horse-powered vehicles to gas-powered vehicles. So he became an expert on gas motors. Apparently, he went to Carnegie Library and read every book he could find on the topic. And having faster trucks that could cover more territory was really needed during these years. So in the early 1900s, we see Pittsburgh growing. They're annexing local townships and boroughs. Of course, in 1907, there's a merger with Allegheny City, which increases the footprint of the city by 8 square miles overnight. This didn't always come with additional resources. So anything that could give firefighters an advantage here to dealing with these additional resources was very much needed. And so this collection shows this transition between the two different modes of vehicles here. So here's an image from 1910. This is a horse-drawn Amaskeg steamer that was owned by the engine company number 47. They were in the Manchester neighborhood of Pittsburgh. And so just a few years later, you see some of the first trucks that were used. These are Knox fire trucks owned by the engine company number 36 in Stanton Heights. That's a station that is still operating today. And so this image is in 1915. About 15 years later, we have this image. This is engine company number 1 along the Boulevard of the Allies in downtown Pittsburgh. So I want to talk a little bit about the images themselves. These are primarily, the format is called gelatin dry plates. They're negative images on glass plates. So, and they're usually 4x5 or 5x7 glass plates. And this is the format that was mostly used in the 1870s to about the 1920s. And so if I was to pull these out into the reading room here, I would need a light box to show off, to display the images. And that's how I've taken this photo. Basically, we would put it on this box that emits light and you can see the image. But we've also now digitized all the images. So we don't have to actually handle the glass plates anymore. As you can imagine, they're fragile, prone to breaking. So we've digitized those. And I also want to talk about how we got this collection. And there's some question marks here, but it most likely had to do with this individual on screen here, who was William Scrappy Patterson. Scrappy, since he was a youngster, aspired to be a firefighter, but he was too short to pass the physical exam at that time. So instead, he became a record clerk for the Bureau, statistician, and the official photographer. He was also very interested in the history of firefighting in Pittsburgh. And you can see here from a Post-Gazette article in 1938, he's pictured with a scrapbook that he's created, and he's holding a fire horn, or a horn that a fire chief would have used to shout orders out to his colleagues during a fire. And this is a great little cartoon that appeared in another article about Scrappy in 1934, where there's this lovely depiction of Scrappy running off to photograph a fire with his camera. So Scrappy had a relative, we think it was a nephew named Ralph Patterson, who was also really into the fire department and fires, also too short to pass the physical exam. So he became a volunteer firefighter and would follow the Bureau of Fire, kind of follow the trucks to different fires. He would hang around stations. And at one point, he saw this collection being, it looked like it was about to be thrown out into the trash. So he rescued it and took it home. And it was Ralph's son and his son's wife, Betty, who later donated the collection to the Heinz History Center. And that concludes my talk. It's been a pleasure to share this collection with you today. I do have some printouts from this collection on a table in the back. So please stop by if you'd like to see some more images. Thank you. And next up, we have Sierra Green, who is our Senior Outreach Archivist. Sierra completed her Master's in Library and Information Science with a specialization in Archives, Preservation, and Records Management from the University of Pittsburgh in 2012. Sierra has worked as an archivist with the Heinz History Center since that year and has been a steering committee member of the Western Pennsylvania Disability History and Action Consortium since 2016. Sierra collaborates with learners of all ages through her outreach and programming efforts. She takes great pleasure in spreading the word about archival collections and the work of archivists. Please welcome Sierra.
Thank you so much, Matt. I'll be presenting on the life, legacy, and collection of Dr. Violette Eash. My first introduction to Dr. Violette Eash came really when I was off the clock. Actually, just a month after Violet passed away, my husband and I welcomed a daughter into our family. And while I was on maternity leave, a few colleagues visited me to catch up and to meet our sweet girl. Wanting to respect my leave, they only just mentioned that an incredible lead, as we call them, had come in relating to local disability history. I felt a long familiar and yet semi-dormant sense of curiosity rise up in me. It was a comforting feeling, but one that I put back on the shelf until I clocked back in December. And among my first tasks when I got back was to scan a collection of Violet's items that had been loaned to us by her college friend, Sue Martin. And in the quiet of those early days back from leave, I slowly became familiar with Violet's story. She blew me away. These images come to mind from that first day with Violet. I was totally charmed by these glimpses into her college life at Pitt during the 1960s, complete with curlers, hairspray, colorful pajama sets, and of course the clunky generic furniture of a dorm room that I recall from my own experience. She was clearly vivacious, right? The next item that leapt out to me is this letter that shows Violet doing field work in Philadelphia. She vividly describes the street scenes of Puerto Rican barrios during the early 1970s. I would later discover that she was working closely with this community, studying barriers to mental health services that existed at that time. And the more that I delved into these materials from Sue's collection, the more that I wanted to understand the contours of Violet's life beyond these fascinating but admittedly disparate glimpses into her world. My curiosity was sated on a February trip to the home of Violet's sister, Arbutus. Sue had graciously arranged for us to visit Arbutus in Holsapple, Pennsylvania, and view a collection of materials related to Violet's life. Upon our arrival, I immediately felt the warm welcome of the Eash family. Arbutus had prepared a home-cooked meal for us, complete with pickled beets and lemon meringue pie, two of Violet's favorite foods. Over lunch, Arbutus recounted Violet's life story, and here's my retelling. Violet's early childhood was filled with climbing fences and hay bales, catching fish, cradling dolls, and snuggling pets. Coal miners' daughters, Violet and Arbutus, were named after flowers in the tradition of their mother, Rose. Violet's life took an unexpected turn at the age of 3 when she and her mother both came down with cases of scarlet fever, and this was in 1947. Violet couldn't shake her fever, and the Eash family consulted with doctors available to them near their home in Holsapple, Pennsylvania. Thus began an extended period of acute illness for Violet that lasted 4 years. Area doctors did not give the Eash family much reason to hope. But despite this, Rose and her husband John continued to seek answers. And eventually, Violet was admitted to Winburn Hospital, which was operated by a local coal company at the time. They then eventually sought treatment in Cleveland and then Pittsburgh. Beginning in 1950, Violet endured 10 months of experimental treatment at Children's Hospital here in Pittsburgh to improve her juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. And for much of that time, Violet was in traction, her joints connected to weights. To counter the bleakness of this treatment, Rose surrounded her daughter's bed with cards, balloons, and other decorations that clearly affirmed how much Violet was loved. During this period, Rose rented a room on DeSoto Street in Oakland to remain close to her daughter. When not directly supporting Violet, Rose worked in the hospital's laundry department. And in the meantime, Violet's sister Arbutus managed the family home in Holsapple. In August 1951, a very proud Violette Eash was finally discharged from Children's Hospital. Following her release, Violet used a combination of leg braces and crutches to walk. Before departing the city, Violet and her family took some time to relish the moment on Valda Parker's porch in Oakland. Valda was the one who rented a room to Rose Eash during Violet's 10-month hospital stay. Now, this was the first of many periods away from home for Violet. Once discharged from Children's Hospital, and after a short stint back in Holsapple, Violet became a resident at the Children's Institute in Squirrel Hill. And in accordance with the Institute's therapeutic practices at the time, Violet made friends and learned to independently navigate the world at a young age through occupational and physical therapy instruction. And the next time Violet left home, it was finally on her own terms. Images of her as an undergraduate student outside of the towers, and then another of her in cap and gown on the cathedral lawn bookend her time at Pitt. I love this photo of Violet with her purse and suitcases in tow in front of the newly built Tower C on Pitt's campus in March of 1965. Violet moved into a single room in the towers and there met fellow student Susan Martin, who became a lifelong friend. Following Violet's death, it was Sue who alerted the History Center to Violet's remarkable life story. Sue did this not knowing that we've worked with the Western Pennsylvania Disability History and Action Consortium over the past decade to preserve stories of the disability community members, such as Violet. Now, after finishing her undergraduate work at Pitt, Violet earned a PhD in counseling psychology, eventually falling in love with teaching. She specialized in the mental health of individuals following natural disasters and also consulted on best practices for the support of disabled people in the wake of natural disasters. Violet spent most of her career as a tenured professor at Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia, where she won the affection of many students and received formal awards for her teaching. Violet retired in 2014 and returned to her Pennsylvania roots, all the while fiercely preserving her independence. Violet passed away in August of 2025 at the age of 81. So now that we know the arc of Violet's story, let's all return to Arbutus's home, where we're now cleaning off the kitchen table after a lovely meal. The time has come to review the items that Violet and her family kept that document her life. Now, as archivists, we're keenly aware that the story of someone's life and then the materials that reflect their life are two separate entities that are intimately intertwined. And in fact, these two entities are strongest when they build on one another. Violet's collection, as I reviewed it, surpassed what I could have even imagined. Let's start with her time at Children's Hospital as an example. Together, the items that she saved bring her story into 3 dimensions. What do I mean by this? Let me show you. The first remarkable document is a formal write-up of Violet's time at Children's Hospital that was created by her mother, Rose. It recounts in remarkable detail the individual treatments, the individual doctors that were involved at every level of her care. It is also revelatory of the excruciating emotion that was experienced by the family at various points in time, as well as the explanation of the faith that carried them through this really difficult period. In addition to photographs, there are visuals such as this beautiful annotated postcard of Children's Hospital to help us place at a particular point in time Violet's experience. If you'll remember the image of Violet when she's surrounded by cards and balloons in her hospital bed, there are those individual cards saved within her collection as well. And then finally, the family also thought to keep the individual medical bills that detailed day by day the kinds of physical therapy that she received, as well as in certain instances, specific types of medication that were tried to give her relief. So altogether, these items stoke a deeper understanding of this period in Violet's life. And they also add depth to our understanding of her character, her perseverance, and her hard-fought independence. But perhaps the most poignant records from this chapter in Violet's life are the letters that both she and her mother wrote and sent to their family in Holsapple. Here are some excerpts from Rose's letters to her husband, John. Of her work in the hospital laundry department, she writes, "We worked. Sweat rolled, water poured down our throats, lint flew, fans fanned hot air, all in all, a very hot day." And then in another letter, "I worked today. I was tired when I started. Until noon, we had folded 1,058 sheets and spread. Beside that, 500 pan covers, 287 towels, etc., and pillow slips, etc." And in Violet, Rose writes, "Hello, I'm in the hospital at 5:55, and Violet is just getting a bath. She looks like a coal miner, and Rose would know what a coal miner looked like. She stood on her crutches better than in the walker today, she said. I was equal parts breathtaken and smitten with the letters that a very young Violet wrote home. In this letter, she recounts, "Dear Daddy, how are you smelling today? Can you smell this paper?" Interruption. We had to stop so that I could get my picture taken. Dr. Danowski wants a picture of the rash on my face. I drank 2 glasses of Lanolac today, and I'm on my 3rd one. You can really see her sense of humor budding in these letters, as well as her matter-of-fact recounting of her health status. Remarkable and telling to consider these characters' traits living right alongside one another inside Violet. Now, beyond this chapter of acute illness, the collection offers numerous avenues to come to know Violet as a professional and as a person. There are the many articles and awards that testify to her teaching skills, as well as the bits of tatting that she enjoyed creating. And I learned from the Eash family that tatting served a functional purpose of keeping Violet's hands nimble. There are church programs that reflect her beautiful singing voice and her faith. There's even an image of her in a goldenrod yellow power suit early in her counseling career. All these and many other items together powerfully and enduringly reflect her story. So needless to say, I was elated and honored to help bring Violet's collection home to the History Center. Its breadth provides opportunities to fall down rabbit holes for deeper inquiries into Violet's life and numerous facets of Western Pennsylvania history. Now, as we were wrapping up that February day at Arbutus's home, she shared with me that Violet had hoped to donate her body to science. And in that moment, I was struck by the depth of Violet's dedication to teaching, down to her very core. And it makes me happy and fulfilled to know that Violet will continue to teach students at the History Center through her collection in perpetuity, thanks to these items that she and her family kept. And for this, I remain so thankful. Thankful to Violet, to Sue Martin, and to the Eash family for generously entrusting Violet's story to us. Thank you.
For our final speaker this afternoon, we have Eric Leege, who is our director of the Rao Jewish Archives here at the Heinz History Center. He joined the archives in 2011, first as a volunteer, and then as a consultant for the past 8 years as its director. He curates the website, the Jewish Encyclopedia of Western Pennsylvania, and the October 27th archive. He writes and speaks extensively about the Jewish history of Western Pennsylvania for local periodicals and organizations. Please welcome Eric.
For more than a century, the Jewish community of Pittsburgh has defined itself as the one place that bucked the national trend towards suburbanization. Unlike similarly sized Jewish communities in places like Cleveland, Detroit, Minneapolis, St. Louis, the Jewish community here in Pittsburgh stayed put in its old Jewish neighborhood of Squirrel Hill. That story is true, but it's not entirely true. Every 20 years or so, the Jewish community of Pittsburgh conducts a population survey. The survey from 1963 found that 86% of the local Jewish population lived here within the city, and only 14% lived in the suburbs. In the 1984 and 2002 surveys, that suburban population had gone up to 35%. And in the most recent survey from 2017, it was at 43%. By the time the next survey occurs sometime in 2035, it will almost certainly be above 50%. I'm guessing it probably already is above 50% today. While the greater Squirrel Hill area remains the center of Jewish life in this region, the suburbs are becoming increasingly important. And that makes Pittsburgh an important place for understanding the relationship between urban and suburban life in America. Over the past few years, the Rao Jewish Archives has accepted archival collections from 5 large post-war suburban Jewish communities in our region. When you take them together, these 5 collections represent one of the largest and most complete set of records documenting the Jewish suburban experience of any metropolitan region in North America. For the past few months, our archivist Caitlin Kokuzi has completed processing work on these collections with generous support from the Posner Foundation. We used a processing method called MPLP, which stands for more product, less process. It involves describing materials in a more generalized way in order to speed up work and make materials more available more quickly to the public. This is especially important when it comes to very large, high research value collections such as these. Altogether, these 5 collections total about 71 boxes of records. What might have taken years of work at our normal pace under MPLP, we can do in a few months. So today I want to share 2 initial insights that we've gleaned from these collections as archivists. And these insights emerge specifically from this MPLP approach. First, I want to give you a quick overview of Jewish migration in this region. The earliest Jewish residents in Western Pennsylvania lived downtown. And then in the first 3 decades of the 20th century, a large group moved up into the Hill District, and a much smaller group started exploring some of the inner Rome suburbs around Pittsburgh, places like Beachview, the East End, Oakland, and Squirrel Hill. By the start of World War II, Squirrel Hill and the neighboring Greenfield neighborhood had become the largest Jewish population center in this region. And through the end of the 20th century, that consolidation would continue. But between 1950 and 1970, there was a huge move to the suburbs nationally. The population of the American suburbs altogether doubled during those 20 years, reaching about 74 million people. And that happened in Pittsburgh as well, although not quite to the degree that it happened in some other places. In our region, suburbanization happened in all 4 directions around Pittsburgh. And this larger migration included several hundred Jewish families going off in each of these directions. There was a group living in the South Hills that started Temple Emmanuel in 1951. The opening of the Squirrel Hill Tunnel and the Parkway East in 1953 eased travel into the eastern half of Allegheny County. Parkway Jewish Center was founded in the Eastmont neighborhood of the eastern suburbs in 1954, and a few years later, Temple David began in Monroeville. A group of Jewish engineers working at the Bettis Atomic Power Laboratory in West Mifflin started Beth Israel Center in Pleasant Hills in 1958. Beth El congregation had started in the Beachview neighborhood of Pittsburgh during World War I, but in the early 1960s, it moved out to Scott Township. And then in the mid-1960s, the northern suburbs of Pittsburgh started to emerge, especially along Route 19. The North Hills Jewish Community Center began in 1968 and later became known as Temple Ohav Shalom. These are the 6 classic post-war suburban Jewish communities in our region. In time, there would be several others, which I won't discuss today in the interest of time, but I'm happy to talk later if anybody wants to talk about them. Of these 6 congregations that I mentioned, 5 donated their records to the Rao Jewish Archives within the past decade: Temple Emmanuel, Beth El, Beth Israel Center, Parkway Jewish Center, and Temple Ohav Shalom. These 5 congregations represent the typical Jewish experience in American suburbs in the 2 decades after World War II, where a combination of factors encouraged this outmigration from urban areas to the new suburbs. We acquired these collections in a few different ways. Beth Israel Center donated its records to us in 2017 as it was preparing to close its synagogue after nearly 50 years. At the time, the Rao Jewish Archives was collecting a lot of collections from small town Jewish congregations that were downsizing, and this congregation sort of fit that trend. The records from Parkway Jewish Center came in 2020 and 2023 as the congregation was preparing to sell its synagogue and move into rented quarters. The 2020 donation was one of the last acquisitions that we made before COVID. And 2023 really shows the congregation emerging from the coronavirus pandemic, realizing that it didn't quite need its building as much as it originally had thought it did. By contrast, Temple Emmanuel, Beth El, and Ohav Shalom are staying put. In those cases, there were new relationships that started to emerge through community programming and that opened contacts for new conversations. We received these 3 collections in various donations between 2021 and 2025. We recently finished processing these collections, which means they're now available for research use. It'll take many years of historical and genealogical work to make sense of all the information in these collections. But today I just want to share two reflections that came to us as we were doing that processing work. The first is that these collections reflect a sense of historical awareness. What I mean is that when you look at the materials, you get the sense that the people involved knew they were doing something that was historically notable. This is a photograph from the groundbreaking ceremony at Temple Emmanuel of the South Hills in the early to mid 1950s. In addition to documenting an important moment for the congregation and really for the larger Jewish community, because this was the first time the Jews of Pittsburgh had stepped out into the suburbs. This photograph is beautifully framed. It's clearly the work of a professional or at least an amateur who knew what they were doing and had a strong visual sensibility. My point is that you get the sense that the congregation was not content to just have a blurry snapshot of this moment. These items come from Beth Israel Center in Pleasant Hills. On the left is the first page of the minutes of the first meeting of the group, where they discuss plans to, quote, develop ways and means of establishing religious facilities and training for Jewish families in the vicinity of Pleasant Hills, Baldwin, Bethel, Whitehall, Brentwood, and nearby communities. You can see that Bethel and Brentwood were added in later. You can hear the conversation in the room as people are saying, well, what about us? The tone reflects the formality of a group that's embarking on a new endeavor, one that they expect to last. These handwritten notations give a sense of the dynamic conversation that's happening in the room. On the left is a photograph from a weekly worship service in the basement of a local church before the congregation had its own building. This was from January of 1961. It was not a particularly notable service. And now looking back, you get the sense that this photograph is a deliberate attempt to document the temporary accommodations as a stop along a pathway towards something more permanent. Within a few years, the congregation had dedicated its own synagogue on Guildhall Road. This congregation might be the most remarkable example of what I'm talking about. In its early days, Parkway Jewish Center held a meeting to decide what its Hebrew name would be. And this photograph shows that meeting. On the chalkboard, it lists 8 possible names, including the ultimate selection that they made, Sharei HaShemayim, which means gates of heaven. Debates over the names of new congregations are common, perhaps even ubiquitous in Jewish congregations, but rarely are they so well documented. You get the sense of a group of people who really wanted to preserve a notable early milestone. This historical awareness probably came from a few places. By the early 1950s, Jews had been living in Western Pennsylvania for a century, and they had undergone a very dramatic transformation from a struggling immigrant community into successful middle-class Americans. They were able to see the arc of their communal experience. And for some, the move to the suburbs reflected the next chapter of that story. A similar awareness was occurring nationally. In the mid-1950s, there were celebrations of something called the American Jewish Tercentennial, which was commemorating 3 centuries since the first documented arrival of Jewish people on the North American continent in 1654. This event was marked by services and celebrations all over the country, including this region. And it was a moment where Jews really started to see their long American experience, an experience that was in many ways older than the country itself. The Jewish involvement in World War II had also created a sense of American pride and accomplishment within the Jewish community, as well as the energy to pursue big ideas. And finally, in the 1950s and 60s, the ability to document was increasingly democratic. There was affordable still and motion picture photography that was available to the masses. And all these factors create a strong impulse to document, which leads to the second insight that we had while we were processing these collections. All these collections share a sense of comprehensiveness. They have long interrupted runs of meeting minutes and weekly bulletins, which are the cornerstone of any congregational collection. They also have extensive runs of publications and photographs. Behind that comprehensiveness is a sense of care and concern. The Temple Emmanuel minutes were kept in these beautiful bound volumes, and most of them have the title stamped in gold on the cover. The remaining records are already arranged into archival groups when we got them. That work was done by a pair of volunteers, Ed and Roz Friedman, who learned some of their techniques here, volunteering for years at the Heinz History Center. We only learned later that they were taking all the knowledge that they got here and applying it to their own congregational collections. Beth Israel Center's records were kept in dozens of blue 3-ring binders. These had been maintained for decades by congregational historian Carolee Burak. In addition to things like minutes and bulletins and speeches, these scrapbook binders chronicled the monthly affairs of the congregation, and especially its sisterhood. She later arranged these materials into a book called The People of Beth Israel Center. And I can tell you that in the decades since we accepted that collection, every 6 months or so, I get a letter from her with updates on the congregation that no longer exists, members who've passed away, interesting events. So she's continuing to do that work of the historian. At Temple Ohak Shalom, longtime congregant Nancy Garber directed us to a secret storage area beneath the congregational office, as you can see that ominous door here. Inside, we found binders containing a complete run of minutes and bulletins, as well as correspondence and photographs. This comprehensiveness is somewhat rare within the archives, certainly within the Rao Jewish archives. Within our holdings, Jewish congregations founded in the late 19th and early 20th century generally kept very good records, but those records weren't always preserved, and what survives can sometimes be incomplete. For example, Rodef Sholem congregation is the oldest and best documented Jewish congregation in Western Pennsylvania. It started in 1856, but the earliest documentation in the congregation is really from the 1870s. On the flip side, organizations in the 21st century are creating an abundance of digital documentation every single day. There's very little diligence being put into preserving any of that documentation. These suburban congregations really hit a sweet spot. They began during the golden years of meetings, when the formality of Robert's Rules of Order were the law of the land. They also stayed put. In our holdings, records often date from the beginning of the last move. When congregations move, they throw away everything that they had at the old building. The exception here proves the rule. Beth El congregation moved in the early 1960s, and much of the documentation that we have for the congregation was created after that move. This comprehensive approach allows for some interesting research opportunities. For example, these images come from Parkway Jewish Center. They all concern major early construction at the synagogue, but from different moments in time and different perspectives. And these images come from Temple Ohak Shalom, documenting the moment when this 11-year-old congregation had finally secured permanent facilities after years of nomadic existence. Each of these photographs and images, they document very particular moments. So for example, that Star of David, at the time they had purchased an Assembly of God church, everyone in the congregation was expected to donate money. There was one member who could not afford it, but he had some contracting experience. And so he said that he would climb up on top of the roof, cut the cross off the building, and put this Star of David on instead. And then the ark at the bottom came from a congregation in Aliquippa that was starting to close at the time. This is the kind of thing that you might be able to figure out if you recognized it, but having this information and then having this photograph, it really allows you to bring the story to life. These images from Temple Emmanuel are just a few of the many, many images that the congregation created as it made upgrades to its synagogues through the years. The original part of the building, which you can see in the top right, was designed by an architect named Percival Goodman, who is widely considered to be the father of modern American synagogue architecture. The most recent addition, which you can see right below that, was designed by a local architect named Dan Rothschild, who later became a president of the congregation. And so you really get a sense of the full life cycle of this building in great detail. And these images from Beth El congregation show its familiar location in Scott Township long before there was much development in the region, and it carries it through all the way to its current sanctuary. And then finally, these images from Beth Israel Center show the way that this comprehensive approach applies on a human level. You can see here different poster boards that the congregation created with photographs of all the congregational presidents, all the presidents of its sisterhood, all the presidents of its men's club, and then photographs of all of its confirmation class. If you go down on your way out into Pittsburgh's hidden history, right when you come in, there's a blue velvet chain with silver medallions on it, and each medallion is the name of a confirmation student from Beth Israel Center, just to give you a sense of kind of the individual detail that was put into these collections. With more time and research, many more insights will emerge from these collections. But these two ideas of being aware of your own history and taking a comprehensive approach to documentation show how these suburban Jewish communities understood the historic nature of their own lives long before historians were studying the suburbanization in great numbers. And that awareness created these wonderful collections, which now, in a lovely turn, allow historians today to study that era in great depth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric, and to all of our presenters. So we have some time set aside for question and answer. So again, for our audience here in person, we have Jess who's running a mic for us. And then folks who are joining us virtually are welcome to submit questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So please feel free to raise your hand and yep, great, wonderful.
What was the height requirement for the firefighters?
So the question was the height requirement for the firefighters, and Matt, if you could come up if you know the answer.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe with some further research in those newspaper articles, we could find that out. But yeah, I was wondering about that too. Yeah.
Sierra, our next question here, and I see a hand raised up front. I'll come to you next.
A question for Eric. On the history of the congregations here in Western Pennsylvania, you kind of focused on Allegheny County. I grew up in Latrobe in the 60s and 70s. We had a small but vibrant Jewish community with a beautiful little synagogue. And over time, its number of people diminished. And about 10 years ago, they sold the synagogue and dissolved it. But could you say a word about the status of synagogues out in counties adjacent to Allegheny County in southwestern Pennsylvania, and how they're doing, how they have done?
Sure. So about 10 or 11 years ago, I guess it was 2014, 2015, the Rao Jewish Archives under my predecessor, Susan Melnick, started really focusing on small town Jewish communities. And since that time, a big part of what we do is driving out to these small towns to collect those records. So we currently hold records as far north as Bradford, as far south as Uniontown, as far east as Huntington, and as far west as East Liverpool, which is not Western Pennsylvania, but you wouldn't know it if you were there. One of the first collections that we took during that process was from Beth Israel in Latrobe. We worked with Mickey Radman, who I'm sure you remember. And it's a great collection. It includes documentation of Jackie Mason's time as a student rabbi for the congregation before he quit the rabbinate and became a comedian, stand-up comedian. So we have about 25 small town collections from the area, in addition to about 25 collections from within Allegheny County as well.
This is for Matt. The fire department and the union put together a history of the Pittsburgh Fire Department in 1970 for the 100th anniversary. Have you ever seen that book?
I have not looked at that. It might be something we have in our library. But a book I used for research was a different one called Pittsburgh's Vintage Firemen. And it covers the 1800s, 1900s.
Well, are you interested in having information into the future?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
because also the firefighters union has been in the process of collecting materials, historical materials and everything, and I can try to contact them. And I have a copy of the history from 1970 as well.
That would be fantastic. We would love to have more documentation of firefighting here.
Yes, I can lend it to you.
Okay.
I'm not quite ready to give it up yet.
Whatever you're comfortable with, we'll work with you.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much to both our in-person as well as our virtual audiences for some great questions, and to our speakers for their insightful answers. We really hope that today's program has inspired you to think about your interests and your passions in history and how they might intersect with the holdings of what we have here at the Detry Library and Archives. All are welcome to research with us. And in fact, here's an image of our reading room for those of you that are joining us virtually, where we have ample tables for researchers to spread out and dig into our collections. Just to reiterate what Matt said at the start, we're open every Wednesday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. and access to the library and archives is always free for everyone. You do not have to visit us in person, though, if you want to take a look in our collections. In fact, a colleague of mine will be sharing links on how to search our online holdings and to submit remote research requests. If you have any roadblocks in your research, please don't hesitate to reach out to our reference desk for additional help. And once you're ready to visit us, you're able to visit us in person. We do have a handy online form that you can fill out to give us a heads up that you're coming, and expect us to snoop into those notes and provide some additional insight into collections or books that we think you should take a look at as well. So again, virtual attendees, we're going to toss those links into the chat. And then for all of you, as a part of the thank you email that you'll receive after the event, you'll receive access to these links as well. We also ask that all of y'all please consider taking a moment and completing our survey. We really value your feedback and are always eager to learn about how we can continue to enhance our programs. For our in-person folks, please do fill out the survey that's at your seat, and you're welcome to leave them at your chair when you're finished. We do have extra pens if anybody is in need of those. I will also share a QR code at the end of the presentation if you're someone that would prefer to use your smartphone. For our virtual attendees, a link to the survey has been dropped into the chat, and we'll also be sending a link to that via email. Now from here, we'd like to bid our virtual audience adieu. Those of you who have joined us in person, please also take us up on the opportunity to continue the conversation with us speakers about our topics. Each presenter has a selection of original materials in a pop-up one-day-only show and tell table for you to peruse at the back of the room. So if something has resonated with you during our talks, please do stop by and chat. In addition, my colleague Brooks Whitaker has a display of items from several of our African American collections. Brooks joined us about a year ago as a project archivist, working on a grant from the IMLS to process and partially digitize our African American collections to make them more discoverable to researchers. He's cataloged 39 collections and counting, and has digitized over 450 images. The digitized images will soon be available on Historic Pittsburgh. The collections featured at Brooks's table touch on the themes of art, African American history, education, families, public safety, journalism, and more. It's important to note that some of the materials on display today depict racist and/or stereotypical imagery or language that may be offensive and disturbing to some. This material provides an important historical record from which to study and evaluate racism. I want to thank Brooks again for all of his work and putting together this display. So again, come and visit us in the back afterwards. I also welcome all of y'all who've joined us in person to enjoy some kosher refreshments in our foyer. We ask that you enjoy those treats in our foyer space and refrain from bringing the food and drink back into the archives just for the safety of the materials that we have on display. I also want to take a moment to thank everyone whose assistance was integral to making this program a success. Thank you, of course, to all of our speakers and my other Library and Archives colleagues and other History Center staff who facilitated this event. I also want to thank our ASL interpreter, as well as our live captioner. So thank you all again so much for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon.